we go. For all of those attendees that just joined us, we already have been talking for about 45 minutes and having some very interesting simulating dialogues about all of the different changes that have happened to our particular industry. The last thing that we just discussed, I think is particularly inspiring, that most all of these composers do seem to feel like this time is as busy, if not busier than ever. So we're really excited to hear what they have to offer. So thank you again for the introduction. I'm going to introduce also these four composers. We have Nainita Desai, Joris de Man, Bobby Tahouri, and Patrik Andrén today as guests and extremely experienced film music composers. I'll briefly introduce each of them, and then as a relatively structured but unstructured form, we will go forward with introducing each of these composers and giving them some time to talk about their creative processes, their ideas, ways that they've worked. And then simultaneously, I invite actually all attendees to feel free to use your Q&A box. My job as moderator is going to be to watch this Q&A box and then try to field these questions in the appropriate place. If not during the presentations while the composers are talking, then toward the end of this session. The session will last 90 minutes, so I'm told, and so I'll try to keep that, I'll try to keep a lasso on that, although I'm sure those dialogues can continue. There is a possibility for some panelists also to put links to further information, and then I'm assuming that it will be also useful and easy to go back and contact the ECSA and ask for further information if there's some things that you want to get in contact with people. So this is a wonderful opportunity for everybody to learn a lot. So let me introduce first Nainita Desai. She's a Royal Television Society award-winning composer who's also received the Ivor Novello Award and British Independent Film Award nominees. Actually, she's nominees for those. A BAFTA Breakthrough Brit, International Film Music Critics Association Breakthrough Composer of 2020, and described by Film4 as one of the top 5 composers of 2020. Her recent projects include the Oscar-nominated and BAFTA and Cannes-winning feature documentary For Sama and The Reason, Jump, the Sundance winning feature. Other recent credits include the BBC drama series Unprecedented, Netflix most watched documentary American Murder, The Family Next Door, and the hit Netflix India series Bad Boy Billionaires. And she is an acclaimed interactive video game composer, in particular of the video game which we hope to be discussing a little bit today, Telling Lies, which is released by Annapurna Interactive. Her 2021 projects, I'll let her introduce those, but there seems to be quite a few of them. The Sophie Story, The Day That Changed Britain, the ITV HBO Max film Persona, and NIMS. She is currently working on games for Half Mermaid and Silver Rain Games Electronic Arts. So we are going to start with Nainita. I'll introduce the other composers as their turn comes around. Nainita, it's really a pleasure to have you here, and thank you so much for taking this time out during your extremely busy period. I think you just are meeting a deadline as we speak. Is that correct?
Yes, literally 10 minutes, 5 minutes before coming on today, but it's the nature of our industry and work, isn't it? You can never not miss you can never miss a deadline. But no, thank you, Yati. It's a pleasure to be here with this amazing panelists who I am in total awe of with their talent and their work. So thank you very much for inviting me.
It's really a pleasure. Now, you know, this being kind of a holistic dialogue, what we're talking about today is we're going to be seeking to sort of explore some general questions. I have a few here. We want to talk about things like creative techniques, for example, when you approach video game scoring in particular. If you have a particular overall approach to interactive games, or if that changes, if the games are interactive or not. And how you utilize technology, perhaps even going as far as what can technology do to change your compositions. So there's a lot of different questions that we can I can hopefully seed as a discussion topic. Nainita, firstly, however, we've got this really interesting game, Telling Lies, that I've got ready to go. Would you like to start with that?
Yes, I mean, obviously, my career has sort of had a few twists and turns in that I started off in the industry writing, doing sound effects and music for video games. I had a background as a sound designer on feature films, and I decided to give it all up and become a composer. And I'd always played on my Amstrad PC with various video games and flight simulators and so on as a teenager, and played Sonic Hedgehog and loved games. I was always a bit of a techie geeky kind of kid, and so I decided to leverage my background as a sound designer and work in video games. And I got work working for a publisher in the UK who introduced me to 6 or 7 of their developers, and I got to write music and do sound effects for Monopoly and Pro Pinball and Sheep and various flight simulators and World War II sort of strategic games, and so that and then my career took a sideways twist, and I ended up scoring film and TV, which I have done for the last 20 years. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I got back into games when I got approached by a developer who was making a game for Annapurna. And I think in many respects, music is music, but with this particular game, it fit my skill set of um, and sensibilities of storytelling and narrative storytelling and applying it to games. And so the game Telling Lies that I worked on was just an absolute hybrid of, and I think that it's the future of entertainment. I think the conversion of linear storytelling with film and TV blended with non-linear storytelling from the games industry. And we've seen little elements of that, for example, with Bandersnatch, which was on Netflix a couple of years ago. And that was, I found it a very I found it very exciting, but it's very binary in choices that you can make and rather limited, and you can break the system because there is only a finite number of possibilities. But the idea and the conceptual side is fascinating, and where we can go with this area of the industry. So with Telling Lies, it's all live action with filmed with actors, real actors. There is no CGI or graphics or animation, and it's an investigative thriller game with non-linear live action storytelling that's like an interactive movie, basically. Um, the music, it's more of a character study. It's about the actual story premise is like an FBI agent, CSI agent, finds a hard drive of material, and he's an undercover agent, and you have 4 main characters, and they're all deceiving one another, and as you find this material of CCTV footage and webcam footage, and it's your job to try and decipher and piece the whole non-linear material together in some kind of form, and have an understanding of it. So that's the basic premise. And so musically, it was very unusual to what I normally do. I'm normally used to writing music to picture, I suppose the equivalent of cut scenes. But here, I mean, I was presented with a 280-page script, a story to read, a linear story, like a film script. And I didn't get to see any images beforehand at all. I just had to write the music based on the script. So that was a challenge for me because I'm very visually inspired and I work in reverse. I normally get to see films and TV shows. And so the way that we decided to handle it was to create a very thematic approach. I wrote 4 themes, a theme for each character, and each theme was about 5.5 minutes long. And it was written in a traditional sort of writing in chunks and layers in a very modular Lego brick kind of way. And each theme had to represent the essence of each human being. It's like taking an obituary someone who's died, and summarizing their life in 150 words and seeing it in the small print on the bottom of the Times newspaper. And here it was like I had to write a piece of music that summarized a whole human being in one single piece of music and all the different facets of their personality. So I'd have a main loop which represented the external representation of their personality that they showed to the world. And then I had a hidden loop, which would come out, unravel itself when you were diving deep into something, and the way that every scene was tagged with metadata, that it would go right at this point. We're going to unravel the hidden loop in the music. So that was quite neat. Structurally, everything had to be very planned and worked out and methodically beforehand. And I recorded it with the London Contemporary Orchestra, who were wonderful. I was looking for an excuse to work with them for a long time, and they really suited themselves to this, because for me it's not just about the notes that the musicians are playing and that's composed, but also very much about the sound that the instruments are making. And so we did a lot of improvisation in the actual recording session itself. So I wrote the themes as very accurately, and they were performed in the recording session. And then I built in extra time in the session to allow for improvisational versions of those same themes, so that if we were playing a particular chunk, they would play the notes on the page, and then we would do another couple of takes where we do semi-improvised takes, where I would leave things, I like chaos and order, and there was, order in what they would play, and then we'd allow for a little bit of chaos to happen. And those alternate takes were implemented into WIs, into the mechanics of the game, so that you didn't, well, even if you felt you were listening to the same piece of music, it was never ever actually the same. You'd always have slightly different takes playing, and sometimes the takes were a little bit, they'd go crazy with their improvisation, but it would always be in context of the actual themes that I'd written. So that was a way of getting more mileage out of the music, and not and allowing for trying to prevent player fatigue, where you're just listening to the same piece of music, but you're not. There's variations there. So that was interesting, and I created, and we had a restricted palette of instruments with 16 strings, 2 woodwinds, and a piano and a harp. So we'd have one layer would be the piano and the harp, which is the foundation layer, upon which I built another layer of strings, and then on top of that we had the woodwind. So when you heard the theme in full intensity, it would be the full mix. And but everything was very modular, which I'm sure you guys are so used to writing to anyway. And the reason I chose the LCO is that it's the sound of, just the sound of the bridge hitting the bow hitting the bridge, and the texture and the color of their playing is so interesting. And it suited the intimacy of the game, because you're, as a player, as a gamer, you are diving into a very intimate conversations and footage of people revealing themselves, totally, where you feel you're not meant to be, you're like a fly on the wall with this material. So I felt that the texture that the LCA would bring to the game would mirror that aesthetic in the score itself. So I think I'm talking a lot here. I'm pretty much aware. So maybe we can just, if you want to play the intro, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The intro is the gameplay that I showed you earlier, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll do that. So this is a clip from the actual gameplay. And I believe it's this one.
Prince Charming?
Mirror, mirror on the wall.
Yeah, I told you I don't need a code name.
How about Evil Queen? Hmm? So what? I'm supposed to just call you Mike? Come on.
Aren't you supposed to be likable?
Well, I'm kind of going for inscrutable, right? It's my new A² vibe.
All right, let's just have you run through your legends so I can tick this box and we can proceed.
Okay.
Okay.
So you get the idea. That's the intro to the game, and you're diving straight into this this material. And so I'm working on the next game by Sam Barlow at the moment, and that's very exciting. It takes this concept to the next stage, and that's all I can say about it at the moment.
Nainita, going back to telling lies, one thing that might be really interesting for us to discuss, and a question that I had actually was that the overall sound of this first introduction is quite unusual when compared to a lot of other sort of A-list video games. And you talked a little bit about using extended techniques. And getting extra mileage, and what did you say, preventing player fatigue and these kind of aspects. So do these seem like unconventional ways to approach working with an orchestra and working with the instruments, or are they just sort of necessary in the gaming world?
Well, it's a way that I devised for myself to get around the concept of the game. But I mean, I know that it was the first game that the LCO had worked in, and when I was in the recording session, I would say, okay, we're going to record. They're used to recording in a very linear way, recording an entire piece of music, and I would say, no, we're going to do 8 bars, 16 bars, and things would be suspended musically, and they didn't understand that. No, I want you to stop playing, just it's a complete piece, a little section at a time, and stems at a time, and layers, and so that took a bit of, they didn't understand it when I had to explain the concept and how we would structure it, and they sort of realized. But working in a modular way is very I couldn't change tempo. I mean, I know, there's a lot of incredibly sophisticated composing in games technically, and we kept things simple on that game, in that I couldn't change tempo and I couldn't modulate terribly. So I found ways of getting around that by modulating within a chunk, but then always ending on a tonic. So it's been a while since I'd composed for games, so I sort of relearning and re-educating myself on that process and approach. But I mean, another game I'm working on at the moment for Electronic Arts is it's a much bigger game, and it's again, it's I think what's refreshing is there's so much creative freedom with games, incredible creative freedom, which is I relish. I'm really enjoying, and the time scale. You know, there's just so much more time to work on a game. You know, game I'm working on at the moment won't be out for, you know, for a long time, long time. But one of the downsides to that is motivation, because I'm very driven by deadlines, yeah, it takes a deadline to get me to write music, whether the deadline's tomorrow or next week or next month. But with games, it's so different. So I find I need a kick up the bottom to be able to, you know, I need these deadlines to keep working. So motivation is an issue for me, because I think, oh, a year's time, that's ages to go, you know. But actually you do have to hit milestones, and it's just as collaborative with developers, with teams, as it is in film and TV. So I really enjoy that. I get really excited by having weekly team meetings and seeing what the animation department are doing, or seeing what the developers are doing, and think, oh, look at this aspect, look at that, and it's just seeing images and graphics and CGI is just really inspiring. I'll watch it and I'll go, right, I know exactly what to do here when I see visual material. So that's really lovely. And conversely, I'll be sending them, I'll say, oh, listen to this track I've done, and then I get great feedback from them, and that encourages me to you know, go down. So it's a constantly evolving, organic monster of a game, you know, when you're working on something, which I really enjoy, how things are very fluid, and when you're working on a project, things can change, and also there's no right or wrong, you know, you're all in it together and you're experimenting, whereas film and TV is quite cutthroat and different politically. Things of it's, you feel you're in a safe space when you're working with a games developing team, you know, whereas film and TV is a little bit different.
You know, this bouncing back of feedback that you have with your crew and the teams, it makes me often think whether the concept of interactive as a gaming principle is also pervading also the team aspect of working together as a team, because you get that extended feedback where you might not have, as you describe. But I was wondering, actually, also one thing that Nainita is just referring to as well, a little bit about performance practice when she's working with ensembles and talking, you know, trying to convince orchestras how to create the right stems and the right bits of musical information to record at the right moments. Some colleagues call it sound painting. Is this a practice that that some of you also use? And, you know, how do you get around teaching the ensemble how to record in this specific way when they're not really quite used to it? And this is for the whole group, actually.
I have not actually done much live recording for in-game stuff. In my experience, that usually is reserved for cutscenes, because it's, you know, there's a limited amount of budget, and, you know, it's kind of like what's the most emotional thing, and is it better to use some of the live recordings for the emotional stuff and use, you know, more sample-based stuff for the in-game stuff. I've done it a little bit, but not with a high level of interactivity. So in the kind of stuff I've done, there are essentially two ways. Well, there are multiple ways to do interactivity, but the ways I've done it is either sort of vertical or horizontal interactivity. And so the live stuff has usually happened when it's vertical, where it's essentially blending layers and having one layer come in, have another layer come out, because in that way you can have a musician play a complete piece of music rather than sections. And you can crossfade between them to get a different, you know, different intensities or different variations on that. Whereas the sort of the horizontal, sorry, that was a vertical interactivity, but the horizontal, where you actually work with, let's say, segments of pieces of music that chop and change depending on what's happening with the action. That sort of stuff, personally, I find a lot easier to realize with MIDI, because you can make cuts much tighter, and you can do things like release tails. So, you know, create a section of music. Initially you'll create the music as a piece of music, even though there might be 4-bar loops or something. I'll try and create it as one piece of music, but I'll put markers in, or, you know, in Cubase you've got an arranger of tracks. You can mark bits out and turn them into patterns, and then use that to test whether your interactivity is working. And what you get automatically in the DAW is that when you switch to another piece of music, is that your reverb tails and your release tails from your samples and stuff, they will all overlap with the next section. So you kind of can hear whether that's working or not. But obviously, when you turn it into a sampled audio piece of music and you start cutting it up, if you were to just very literally put one 4-bar segment behind the other one, then you're going to hear very distinct cuts between the different intensities. So I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted on this one, but what you end up doing is putting 2-bar sections in between, or 4-bar sections in between each segment of music, cut that out and overlap that with the next piece of music that's coming, so that you have a 4-bar loop here, the other 4-bar loop is here, but the release tail will be sort of superimposed on top of that. And that way you can have really seamless transitions from anything to anything. So yeah, that's my experience. And in that essence, I've only really done sort of solo instruments or very simple things on those kind of tracks, but not really full ensembles. So I think that'd be much trickier in a way to realize, but I'm sure some of the other panelists might have some thoughts on that.
Actually, Joris, it's speaking about overlap and transitions. This might actually be a good time to transition to you, because we can continue this discussion, I'm assuming, also with your compositions as well, and your techniques. So let me very quickly introduce Joris as our second panelist. Thank you very much, Nainita. That was really fascinating. And
yeah, thanks.
Please keep joining us and interject as well. Joris de Man is a 2-time Ivor Novella winning composer and BAFTA-nominated composer with 25 years of experience, scoring for video games, animation, film, TV, and commercials. He's known for his live orchestral scores to the first 3 titles of the Sony Guerrilla Games Killzone franchise. Other recent works include the recent PlayStation 4 blockbuster Horizon Zero Dawn, and HZD, The Frozen Wilds. Also the hit Vainglory, used for the Apple's iPhone 6 launch, and a live orchestral score to the BAFTA-winning director Mike Mort's animated feature Chuck Steele, Night of the Trampires, which was premiered at the 39th Annecy Animation Film Festival. So Joris, we're on the topic, obviously, of transitions and the modular aspect of composing. I think that you brought also some interesting creative tidbits for us to look at. So take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And I was just going to show a few bits of Horizon, the Horizon Zero Dawn, mainly just to show sort of the juxtaposition between what can happen in a game and what happens when you have a release trailer. Because what's interesting is that sometimes game trailers are very sort of representative of what the game looks like, but sometimes the trailers have a different function, and it might just be to get people really excited and sort of do something slightly odd in a way to get your attention, kind of go, oh, I wonder what this is about. And that's kind of what ended up happening with Horizon. Horizon is also a title by Guerrilla Games, and before that they've been primarily known for the Killzone franchise, which was a first-person shooter franchise. So when they announced this game, which was a third-person sort of open world adventure, it was quite an ambitious project, and they really need to sort of show that they were able to pull something like this off, and also get people to sell into this new world that they created, which is quite an odd world because it's, on one hand, tribal. It's a game that takes place, I think, about 6,000 years after mankind has perished and sort of has come up again as tribes, and they inhabit this world that next to regular wildlife also has these massive dinosaurs, robotic dinosaurs, and a big part of the mystery of the game is figuring out why these are there, where these come from, and it ties into the story of the main character Aloy, who has to sort of, you know, find out who she is, but also find out how she relates to all these creatures in her world. So the trailer that we did was a sort of shows a ritual, and the idea was that there was some shaman in this ritual that had a vision, and the vision was bits of Horizon Zero Dawn, so it was quite odd because it doesn't really show any gameplay, but it introduces you to some of the characters, some of the weird mystique that's going on in this world, and also to some of the sounds that we had to develop to make this world come alive. And one of the big challenges was, you know, coming from Killzone, which is this massive sort of space opera, big orchestra kind of sound, you know, lots of synths, to Horizon, which was kind of almost the direct opposite. They wanted a very intimate sound, they wanted tribal drums, they wanted a very distinct palette of sounds, and you know, basically said we wanted to hear something that we haven't heard before. So I'm going to show you a little presentation of some of this stuff that we did. I'm just going to share my screen. Let's see if this works. And so it was a trailer to announce the release of the game. And also, of course, when games are made and when they're still in development, there's actually not always that much footage to show because a lot of things are still in development. And so you got to make something specific for the game. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's a shamanic ritual that shows different visions of the game and different visions of Aloy, the main character. And it was supposed to be quite artistic. So what you'll see now is a sort of proof of concept. So just some what's called an animatic, where they basically put sketches and things together, a little bit of music, just to get a sense of what this was going to look like. And what you're going to see is essentially a sort of ritual. Let's see if this is playing. Can you hear this? So I won't show the whole thing, but just to give you a general idea of that. And one of the things you'll hear is this sort of sweeping sound as well. And that was one of the shaman has like this, it's almost like some kind of incense on a chain that he's sort of sweeping around, and that's the sweeping sound you hear. So that was an important part of the trailer. They wanted that in because that could sort of start the rhythm and kind of get some rhythm going and start that up. So some of the ideas that we came up with is obviously from that animatic, you could see that it had to be quite percussion heavy. We also needed some voices for the shamans to make some noise, to kind of have some idea of what they were going to sound like. I'd already written some music for the game. Flutes featured quite heavily, and when I initially talked to the games company, they didn't like the idea of flutes, and you know, they said, well, we don't like flutes because they're sort of high and screechy. And so I said to them, well, what about if we would just try some of the lowest flutes that we can find? So I found an excellent flute player in London called Andy Finden, who's got a contrabass flute, which is probably one of the lowest flutes that you can get. And it's a bizarre looking instrument, like a big sort of metal triangle with a lot of pipe work, and it's got an amazing sound, and it sounds quite tribal when you blow it in unconventional ways. So that became quite a big part of the score. And because it was a trailer, we wanted to sort of have quite an epic ending to it. And so I suggested that we use a bit of choir. So we found a great English choir, and I think we had about 16 or 20 singers, which for the most part worked out brilliantly. All the sort of singy stuff itself was great, but I also wanted to do some vocalizations, and that's where we kind of hit a little bit of a snag. in that they can't, they weren't very good at sort of doing tribal vocalization. So we had to find another solution for that, which I'll come to in a second. And the other thing was that we tried to avoid things like strings, too many sort of obvious trailer type sounds, and to really sell this sort of tribal thing. One of the composers on Horizon who worked with me was Niels van der Leest, and he's a Dutch percussionist, and he was affiliated with this fantastic group called Circle Percussion. And Circle Percussion had like one of the biggest Odaico drums in the Western Hemisphere. So that seemed to be perfect for a project like this. So we ended up going to them and doing quite a bit of recording in their space. And this thing sounded fantastic, but you can hear a little of that. So that sort of stuff. A whole bunch of other Japanese drums that we ended up using. He has some smaller drums. So the whole idea was to get a range of different types of toms, bigger ones and smaller ones, to sort of juxtapose different rhythms against each other, so that it wasn't all just in the lower register. And some more drums, and this big African drum, which is called a katan, which is quite nice. Let's see. And then also we recorded some flutes at Angel Studios. This is Andy Finden, and he's playing a Fuyara, which is a shepherd's flute. And one of the nice things about that is that it's got a really rich sort of harmonic range. So you can sort of get these, it's called an overtone flute. So it's great for these sort of really aggressive chiffs and things if you want this really sort of cinematic sound. So we ended up recording some of that and some of the other flutes that he plays. And some of it was tonal, but a lot of the stuff I ended up recording was actually more effects-based, sort of trying to do something rhythmic against all that onslaught of the percussion. So got a little snippet of that here when we're recording it. Cracking. I actually want a bit more of that in terms of building it up in the dynamics. To start with that sort of more intense dynamic straight away.
Okay.
Because I like the breathiness and the sort of.
So it wants to start higher.
Yeah, start in a higher dynamic.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
You need to go to 11.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Here we go. 8 clicks.
Brilliant.
Lovely. Brutal.
And then we recorded a bit of choir as well. And I also did a beautiful rendition of the main theme that we did just as an extra. Oops, sorry. I don't know what happened there. Let me just see if I can go back. It's playing 2 samples at the same time. So I'll just show you what the trailer looks like when we sort of put all that stuff together. There we go. So one of the things that happened at the end was you can hear some choir in there. And we asked the choir also to do some of the tribal shouts, but I hadn't quite appreciated that they're all quite posh. And so they found it really difficult to do that sort of stuff because it was all a bit, you know, saying like, oh, you got to sound like this tribal dude and just, you know, go rah, like that. And it all went, oh, oh. So we ended up, I ended up finding a New Zealand Maori haka, you know, that they do at the start of rugby games, and found a sort of a separate recording of that, and that was great. That had just the right sort of intensity. So I ended up editing that in between some of the tribal chants to get more of the visceral power that you needed for that sort of stuff. And thankfully it all sort of came together in the end. But yeah, so that's that.
We have some comment from James that, whoa, that sounds cool, and I'm sure we can all echo that. It has an amazing sound, and one of the things that becomes more apparent in these particular processes, perhaps, is that we're all experienced not just with composing music per se to perfection, but also producing it. So being able to guide these kind of sounds and the creation of the sounds in the studios, and having the musicians respond to them to the way that we see fit. So it's not just about structuring it in a definite way, but having the imagination to let it develop naturally through all of these different inspired forms of instruments and different techniques that we have available. So it sounds
absolutely
great.
Thank you. And I think what's really important with that is to find good collaborators. And you find, you know, I always knew that London had great musicians. What I didn't really know up until this project was what they bring to a project in terms of their own experience. Because I was always under the impression, how it worked previously when I work with musicians in Holland, is that you write something, you give it to them, and they perform what you've given them, and kind of that's that. But when you get really stellar, experienced musicians, and Andy's played on probably more films than anyone I know, is that they don't just understand the notes that you've written, but they understand the intent behind them, and they can really bring their own experience to that. So, and that becomes clear very quickly, so that they don't just play the stuff that you give them, but they kind of go, well, what about if I do this, or what about if I do that, or is this what you mean, or is that what you mean? And if you're looking for this particular effect, then actually if I do this, or if I take this flute, or I do that, then you're going to get much more of what you're looking for. And that's a value that you can't really describe, and that really depends on from musician to musician who you work with. And that's something that became really apparent on this project. In the same way with circle percussion, they're used to playing this kind of these big sort of events where, you know, the very sort of visual taiko drumming events where it's not just a musical performance, but it's also very much a theatrical performance. And so they very much understand how those things are supposed to sound. And Andy was great in that he understood that some of the stuff I was looking for wasn't actually tonal, but was rhythmic. And he was like, all right, so you really want this sort of to essentially, you know, interlink with the rhythm that you've got on the percussion, as opposed to just being this tonal thing on top. It's very much sort of providing an alternative rhythm. And I think that sort of stuff is really important. And that's something you can pick up as you go along, is find out what your musicians can bring to the project, not just in terms of what they can play or what you can write for them, but in terms of their own experience, what they can bring to it.
Excellent. Yeah, a lot of excitement there. So thank you so much, Joris. It's really a very interesting project. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our next panelist, and that's Bobby Tahuri. So Bobby, it's great to have you here. Let me introduce very quickly Bobby. He's an American composer. He's in LA at the moment, so that's why he's wearing a t-shirt. And he's a musician and record producer. He's provided additional music and arrangements for other composers, including Raman Diawadi's projects. He was included also in Paramount Pictures' Iron Man, also Clash of the Titans, and done some work for HBO with Game of Thrones. Bobby has also provided additional music on many other projects, including the Steven Spielberg-produced Emmy Award-winning miniseries Into the West, the DreamWorks Pictures Disturbia, also 20th Century Fox Hitman, Universal Pictures Despicable Me 2. And he's also scored comedy films such as Zero Charisma, which was the winner of the Audience Award at the 2013 SXSW Film Festival. In the video game world, Bobby is best known for composing scores to Marvel's Avengers, which we may look at now, and Rise of the Tomb Raider. It's really a pleasure to have you as part of this panel, Bobby, and welcome. I'm going to give you the floor, and
yeah, thank you, Yati. Happy to be here. Yeah, I thought I'd show a gameplay or a looped bass traversal piece from Avengers, and basically footage that I received to score to, and me trying to make a loop-based piece of music not boring and try to make the piece as exciting and dense, and give the audio director at Crystal Dynamics, in this case for Avengers, enough material, enough tracks, enough stems to work with, so that when they implement the score into the game, they can kind of pick and choose what to mute and unmute based on what the player is doing. And I just thought it'd be fun to show a scene or a traversal section that I scored, and to show you that how dense I made this. And maybe the other composers can chime in. I don't know if you do this as well, but for this, for loop-based sequences, I try to make it as dense and as give as much information as possible, which sometimes you'll hear discordant pieces and things music will kind of clash. But I know that when it's implemented, the audio director can raise levels and mute and unmute certain sections so that it'll all fall into place. So just let me just share my screen and just show you.
All the conspiracy theories online point to this canyon as the Resistance home base. They're the only chance I got. At least I know someone's been out here anyway. Just like me to travel across the country chasing rumors. These rumors are all I got. Aim's out here too? I have to.
So basically, you heard elements of horror, wonder, and all the end result. You wouldn't hear all of that while you're playing the game. But I just wanted to give an example of what I'm delivering to the company, so that they can just again pick and choose certain moments, which may or may not happen while the player is playing that little section where it has to be loop based and you have to provide variety.
You know, Bobby, if I can just sort of seed that question that comes up about you mentioned right now you're talking about density, and it kind of seems like the concept of density in music and density in layering different strata, different tracks on top of each other, is slightly different for the concert world as it is for the video game world. I'm reminded, for example, years ago, I interviewed Austin Wintry, who was talking about how sound and the accumulation of sound would bring game players into like a particular zone in like games like Journey, for example, where they were just layered on top of each other. So do you think that you approach that in a different way? And this is an open question for others as well, in terms of how much to stack and how dense you want that to sound.
Yeah, I think for this game in particular, for Avengers, I was very conscious of trying to just provide as many layers as possible. Because yeah, the scene, she's just walking through the desert. I know that sound effects will take place, and I know that certain things will happen. She'll look up and there's birds that she'll be frightened of, and she's not sure what to expect. So I'm just aware of how, like, trying to convey in whatever music that I write, the different emotions that a character may or may not feel in that particular setting. And so I'm thinking of, yeah, wonderment, horror, she's cold. What does that feel like to be cold? High string tremolos, and she's about to reach her goal. So you give them, so I provide also just a harmonic structure to that feeling. It's I don't know. It seems like it's a lot of fun to just I don't know, just give all these different possibilities musically to an otherwise just a boring sequence of someone just walking through a canyon.
Yeah, it's a really interesting process, isn't it? In that when you deliver the layered approach, in what someone else will do with that, because sometimes they combine things in ways that you didn't necessarily expect, and it almost one of the sort of the implementers roles almost becomes one of like a music editor, where you know they're using your music, and sometimes stuff gets reused, or sometimes stuff gets used in a slightly different way. I've even had instances where someone combines, you know, if the cues are in the same tempo or in a similar key, might be combining, you know, even bits from different cues, and kind of go, hang on one hand, you know, you kind of, on one hand, you got to put your ego as a composer aside and say, well, that might not necessarily be how I intended it, but it sort of fits the end product really well. And it's probably something that I wouldn't have considered myself. And I think that's a really interesting process generally, is that I've found, and this is something, I don't know about you guys, but something I really learned over the past few years was I used to very much approach music and the stuff I was doing as a sort of isolated thing. I've got to create these assets, if you will. I've got to, you know, these are my parameters, these are my guidelines as to what they want to hear. I might have some reference material, and then I go off and do my thing, and then I give it to them, and that's it. And actually, sort of looking at the end product, I've come to realize that it's so much more than that, and that you kind of have to almost put yourself in the place of the viewer or the gamer, and kind of look at it as a sort of holistic thing. Like, I'm part of the puzzle, but I'm not, you know, I can't just focus on my thing, because this has got to fit something. That's got to fit with the sound effects. It's got to fit with the dialogue. And I guess that's true for both film and games. And so it can be very useful to work backwards from that process. Is kind of go, instead of just focusing on my little bit, let's actually look at the game as a whole, or at the film or the piece, you know, whatever I'm working on as a whole, and start working backwards from there. Because, you know, there's dialogue there, there's something else going on there. And it was really interesting, on one of the Facebook groups I'm on, there's a American composer, Trevor Morris, and he shared a preset for his vocal processing on the dialogue track. And he says, you know, my first port of call is whenever I get any footage, is the first thing we're going to do is, you know, and I'm thinking, what's he going to do? Is he going to do spotting? Is it, you know, he's going to look at the scene? He's going to make notes? No, he said, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make the dialogue track sound as clear and as best as I can, because the dialogue is king. And I know that whatever I'm going to write underneath this, you know, the editors, you know, the sound editors or the mixing engineers are basically going to shave my music off around that dialogue. So if I make sure that when I'm composing that the dialogue is as loud and as clear as it can be, then I've got a much better idea of what that's going to do once my music's underneath. And I thought that was like, that's a brilliant tip. And I think with games it's very similar, is that when you start looking at the whole project and the whole product as a whole thing, as opposed to just your little area that you're focusing on, then I think you've got a much better chance of creating something that will fit much better with the whole.
Yeah, and that's what I like about games, the collaborative aspect of working with just the audio team and sound designers and just knowing you're one part of the whole process. And also being surprised when you're playing the game, you know, over delivering music and stems and tracks and layers, and then just seeing how that just gets presented as you play is really exciting, and just I just love the collaborative aspect of that.
And it's, I guess it's very different to when you're working in film, because, you know, if you work in film and animation, there's a dub you go to where you can actually sit down and hopefully you might have a chance to still inject a little bit of control over how your music is finally delivered. But with games, that's the dub is almost happening in real time, and changes completely according to whatever the player decides to do at that point in time. So it's a very different process, and it's a very, for me at least, a very different way of letting go because, you know, there isn't a dubbing mixer. There's the only thing you can talk to an implementer or someone who's doing the implementation of the music and say, well, I hope you don't pull my stuff down too much, but that's about as far as it goes. But you know, for the rest, it's up to the gamer really what happens.
Yeah.
Sorry, if I cut in here, working on Battlefield and speaking about the density of the tracks, like Bobby, you brought up, it's probably different. It's probably a different game because Battlefield is about war and it's chaos most of the time. So we had a lot of trouble. You know, it was always a war between the sounds. You know, because you have all the shootings and the footsteps, and while playing, you also have. You don't want to have music because you want to hear everything else. If someone's coming behind you and to assassinate you, and so that was maybe it's different to other games. It probably is because it's probably in the higher spectrum of working against. You know, everyone wants to hear everything basically. But it's. I was also going to say that the technical aspects of that is that you have, or what I feel composing for a game. You have these technical aspects, and they are sort of in the way of composing really good music. Sometimes you start to thinking about the technical aspects. You know, this comes in here, and you have a layer on this, and when that happens, this gonna happen, and it's easy to get lost in the writing process, I think. So usually, what I do is just take away. Okay, I hear what you're saying. It's gonna be a interactive play, but we also need to make music because in the bottom end it's the music that's interesting. Yeah, I just put that in for the.
Yeah, no, it's a really important point, because that's the thing, is that especially during game development, you don't always know what sound effects are going to do, and that's an experience I had on Killzone 3. There was most of the time in games, you know, you're sort of, if it's a first-person shooter, as I guess Battlefield is in a way, is that you're walking around, and the player's in an area, and you know, enemies arrive, and when the enemies arrive, the music might ramp up, and then you know, you shoot some enemies, and then the music ramps down again, and there's usually still a level of freedom. But then in Killzone 3, there was also what they call an on-rails section, so you might be put into a vehicle, and the vehicle is not like Battlefield freely controllable, but it's actually someone else is flying it, and you're along for the ride. You might have a gun or something to shoot with. And I got this brief for this sequence, and I hadn't seen the sequence, but it just said, oh, it's going to be really exciting because you're flying in between this sort of oil rig platform, in between all these pipes, and it's almost a bit like Star Wars when you go through the at the end of Star Wars 1, when you go sort of through the Death Star bits. It's a little bit like that, but it's really exciting. And so, you know, so I thought, well, you know, that sounds great. And we're going to put my John Williams cap on and compose something, you know, really like with lots of musical ups and downs and stuff. And I put far too much time and detail into it, because when it came to actually playing the game, the guy on the plane or whatever it was, the platform that's flying around, was shooting a fucking minigun. So, you know, you can't hear anything. So for most of the time, but anytime someone shoots, you don't actually hear anything of the music. Right. And so through the whole sequence, I think you probably hear about 10% of the music. And it's probably one of the cues I spent most of my time on. So it kind of pays off to know beforehand what's going to happen in that particular sequence before you go crazy with the music. And again, it was a good lesson to learn, like, yeah, this is not the Joris de Man show. This is a game, and your music is part of this game, but it's not the focal point. And as much as you like to do the best job you can, that best job isn't necessarily writing the best music. It's writing the best music that fits whatever the sequence is doing. And sometimes that can be a lot more simple and a lot more basic musically than perhaps you would like to do, but that's perhaps what that sequence needs at that particular point in time.
And music for battle is actually an interesting kind of extension of the concept of layering, extreme layering, because as a composer, as you said, sound design is piled on top of chaotic music, which is piled on top of CGI and all sorts of dramatic effects to create this like really thick soup of all sorts of things that are happening at the same time. And how you sort of mitigate that balance is really crucial. So that's really interesting. And I think this is also a good segue to introduce Patrik so that we can get a good look at Battlefield, which I think is going to provide more interesting things for us to talk about. So Patrik Andrén is born in 1971. He's Swedish, Swedish composer of film, TV, and video games. He's mostly known for his work on The Bridge. I think you say Bron, is that right? And video games Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5. Patrik's collaboration with composer Johan Söderqvist, I think I mentioned it. Yeah, there we go. Has resulted in working on films such as Kon-Tiki, which was an Academy Award nominated film, In a Better World, which won an Academy Award in 2011, Serena, Department Q, The Keeper of Lost Causes, The Absent One, Captain Sabeltan, Sabeltan, that's right, The King's Choice, and Love Is All You Need, and more. Patrik is also a musician and plays the piano. So Patrik, really thank you very much for being in the panel as well. We have some little clips from Battlefield, and yeah, take it away.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you for everyone else for their introductions. I'm humbly overwhelmed to hear about all the others projects here, and it leaves me a little blank, and I'm going to try to do my best here. It's so I'm one of the two composers for Battlefield. The other one is Johan Söderqvist, which you mentioned, and we've been working. So I'm a one game wonder, I would say. It's soon to be two games wonder. We're working on a new game which takes place in. So Battlefield is the historic, and this new game is in a distant future, 500 years from now, and so it's a totally different thing, which is refreshing, I think. However, this Battlefield game has been going on for it's 2 games with all the DLC packs, and we've been working for it for about 6 years totally. And as Nainita said in the beginning, you have a lot of time, so it's a luxury to be able to write and plan and all this. But then when the deadline comes, you better be ready, because then everything falls into place, which is different from working in films. You also so the pressure is always on. However, it's hard to not write during a deadline or something pressure, and especially now when they keep moving deadlines, it's hard to maintain the energy, I think. However, writing for Battlefield has been amazing, and I can also, relate to everything that everyone's saying about, recording orchestra, and I think one of the topics came up about writing orchestra in an interactive way, and how to treat how to do that and stuff. And we've been fortunate to be able to do that in Battlefield, because it's such a huge game and going on for so many years too. So we we tortured a few orchestras, just playing effects and stuff, you know. And it could be we had some things prepared, but we also got the opportunity, and that's a luxury too. And I'm so thankful for that, to be able to go to an orchestra and say, "Can you do this?" You know, and you try to sing something, and you try to them, you know, to listen and keep respecting you afterwards. But it's so we've done that, and we also been to Abbey Road a couple of times and recorded LSO. So we did. That was more the prepared music, but then we've been, you know, we've been able to record a lot of orchestras actually, and a lot of sessions, a lot of instruments and soloists, and everything to cover this big game. And also I think we started with having, you know, the contract saying write 70 minutes of music, and we ended up writing 15 hours per game. So it's like 30 hours of music through these 6 years, which it's impressive. I mean, I get tired just thinking about it. And it's not to put anyone off for going into the games. It's probably something we chose ourselves to do like that, but we felt there was no other way to you know, to have to keep the whole game with just 70 minutes of music, because it's a world war, you're in all of the world sort of. But we can I gave you a clip, Yati, and shall we watch that, and I can talk a little about.
Of course.
It's actually bridging what we talked about, torching orchestras with doing effects, but then we put it into the game. So please play it.
Okay.
Was war das für ein Geräusch?
Den kommer til å trenge. Der er han. OK. 2 igjen.
We can stop there. It goes on a while, and it's yeah. So this is orchestra, and it's a solo violin, which is the sort of the voice of Norway, which this takes place in, and drums, and the thing here was to keep building the suspense. So when you sneak around, you hear as if it was a movie. We try to score it interactively as it goes on, and when they start shooting and they notice you, a different kind of music comes on. So a lot of times in Battlefield, we try to have very extensive musical pieces or effects tracks or whatever you call it, to be able, since it's a big game, people play it a lot and they keep coming back to the same place. We didn't want them to like, I've heard that music before. So we always made super long loops basically, and in this case you have a low intensity track, a medium intensity, and a high intensity track that mix it itself. And what I was saying before about writing technically, this is where it can go wrong, because you start just writing, you're writing a low intensity track and then you have something on top. So it was more of a discussion, what should we put in the low intensity and high intensity, etc. And I think it's I just found this on YouTube, and it's I think it works really well, since it's it's actually scoring itself while you're playing.
Yeah, I really like the use of the solo instrument on top of that. That gave a really nice sort of eerie edge to it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's we recorded a lot of solo violin for that place also in Norway. I want to, if I should talk a little bit about the process, I want to move back, and it might be the same for you guys, but I feel that when doing a project like this, and it goes for every kind of a movie or a TV show or anything, it always comes down to the dream, the dream and the vision of where it's going. It's not so much about we're going to have this kind of music. It's more like what do we vision, where are we going, and if that is intact, or it's a solid dream, and then it usually holds till the end, sort of, and you can conclude it. If it's a film, you can conclude the dream. You have the bow of the whole composition, and in the game as well. And in Battlefield, we had the dream that we tried to get at was to have to write the mother of Battlefield games, the music for the mother of all the games so far. And the vast amount of music that came out was at least an intention to go that way. And we also wanted to make it very emotional, not to have it's great to go out and kill people, that kind of music. This is really deep stuff. It's world wars, and it's sad, it's chaotic, it's beautiful, all those feelings at the same time. And that was also a part of the dream, to never go, not feel anything, even though you are. It is a game, and you're supposed to have fun too. But you go out and you want to feel something, and when you die, that comes up a name of the player you've been playing, and you feel something. It's a lot of people involved.
I think
emotions.
I think that's something that isn't often enough discussed with games, is because sometimes, because games can be so technical, and I think it's probably done more on film than it is on games, is that we don't talk about feeling enough. We talk very much about the technical implementation. Oh, this is an action sequence, so we need action music. But actually, it's much more important to think about, well, what do you actually want the player to feel? Because, obviously, if it's action music, you can put some action-paced music on that. But is that really what's feeling-wise going on for the player? And think about it much more in a longer scope. So not just what's happening right here, but what's happened before and what's going to happen after. And is there musically something that we can do in terms of, you know, musical storytelling that can help that process and create a more, because that's my experience of having worked in games, and thankfully that's changing. But it used to be very much that, well, let's just say with the Killzone games I worked on, the first thing they always thought about was the areas that you would be fighting in. And then the narrative would come from trying to link those areas together with some kind of story so that there would be reasons to go to these different areas, which is kind of a backward way of doing things, because, you know, you're essentially saying, all right, the action pieces are kind of the main events, and then the story is kind of just a little bit of glue that we're trying to use to paste all this stuff together. And because of that, emotionally never resonated as much as something like Horizon, where with Horizon, they really started with the story first, and the story was developed long before they did any of the game stuff. And because of that, it's a much stronger narrative, because there's a character development, there's a story arc there, and the character and user player with the character go through something and come out, you know, hopefully a slightly different person at the end. And I think that's really important.
It is really important, and I agree that I think someone mentioned that earlier too, that working with game people, it's not so the wheel tracks are not put out how to work with music in this, which is both good and a little stressful too, you know, because in film you have, this is how we do it, you know, and you have everything is in within the frames. But with the games, we pushed a little bit, you know, we try to, like, okay, what if we do like this instead? What if we don't treat it like you know, an action cue? We treat it like this is chaos, you're super stressed, it hurts, you feel like shit, and you have to get to the other side or whatever, you know. And so that, and in the beginning, you know, it was a little bit, we want fast music, you know, and strong, you know, and we presented versions, and it turned out well, and everyone's open, and it's great people at DICE who does Battlefield in Stockholm. So it's, but it's true. You have to push it, and also that's where the dream comes in. You know, you can't really. You want to get underneath the actual game and what you see. I think it's important in order to get through it, the whole work. Yeah.
Patrik, that you talking about the emotion, it would be a good idea to field perhaps a few questions as we sort of draw towards the end of this this panel discussion. But one very interesting question that just came up might be an invitation to explore that. Sarah Hage just is asking about this so-called blurred line between sound design and music, and perhaps part of that experience, that emotional experience, has something to do with the integration between music and sound design. When you're working with these really complex and emotional elements, dramatic gameplay, death, you know, these attributes, are you getting feedback from the sound designers as well? Are they considering the overall sort of soundtrack experience, or are they focusing mostly on your contribution?
In Battlefield?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's an ongoing. We work very closely to the audio director at DICE, Ben Payor, and he's amazing. He wins all the prizes every year, and he's a close friend of ours. And so he's doing the effects, and we can speak freely between us. You know, that do you have to have these loud bombs all the time? You know, and he listens to that. But yeah, it's of course, and then on the other hand, we give them, like for Battlefield, we recorded a lot of metal, so we just bang on things, scratch on things, destroy things, you know, which it's very close to sound design. So we end up maybe we give them, okay, here you have 2 gigs of metal. Use it if you want, and then we use it in the music, and it blends nicely eventually, I think. So that's part of the process to always be, you know, working with the sound design and incorporating the sound design into the music, I think, at least in Battlefield. Yeah.
Also, my experience has been where if I deliver a score stems, the audio director will often take a bowed cymbal that I created or a brass swell and use that as a sound design aspect, and he'll time stretch things or pitch shift things that I've given to him, and it's very collaborative in that regard, which I like in games.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interjected.
No, no. Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, that's something that we experienced on Horizon as well, is that the sound team went out and recorded a whole bunch of actually sort of odd instruments because they needed really interesting sounds for the robots, because they would use some of the sounds in the vocalizations as well from the robots, and they need lots of different, you know, as much variety of sounds as they could get. And they basically, you know, put it on a cloud server, and we could go in there and find things. And there were some really interesting sounds in there, like sort of bowed piano strings and things like that you kind of go, well, this is great, I can use that, or I can, you know, can implement that in some ways. So yeah, I think it's definitely happening more. And I guess the difficulty you have with games is that so much of it doesn't come together until right at the end, and that sometimes that makes collaboration difficult because no one quite knows what it's all going to sound like until literally you're in the last months of production, when pretty much most of the music is already written. So it's more, I guess, a case of going in and balancing the mix than anything else, because there's not that much time to do anything else in my experience.
Also, the thing of having tonal sound effects that are tonal. I mean, even in film and TV, you know, you think never the twain shall meet. The composer only handles the tonal side, and the sound designer should stay away from that. And I'm finding that one of the games I'm working on at the moment, I'm thinking, oh, some of the sounds coming through from the sound designers are quite tonal. So I'm thinking that I'll have to collaborate in what key should we write this in? You know, what key or you want to adapt your sound effects to put it in the same key as my piece of music, and vice versa. So, you know, as you say, it's hard to find the time to do that. But I think it's important that we make time to constantly share files and share what's happening in certain points of the game, to just keep an eye on it. So otherwise you'll end up with something really dissonant. And who's to say that a sound designer should stay away from tonal sounds? You know, it can be really impactful. You know, I've taken sounds from sound designers and incorporated them into my music, and vice versa, where they've taken recordings of, as you said, you know, earlier, musicians that I've done recording sessions with, and I'll share some of those sounds with the musical sounds with the sound designers, and you end up with something quite magical if you can make it work out. You think people go, "Oh, am I listening to sound design or is that music?" And that's really interesting place to be in.
That could be the new way of working, you know, and the new way of developing projects is this intense collaboration between different types of sort of slightly crossover approaches. So sort of feeding into that, there's actually quite a lot of questions that are asking about the future of game music and the future of scoring. You know, obviously, I think this feeds into whether we have any predictions or whether there are any trends that we're watching. Do any of you, I know Nainita in particular, Telling Lies is a quite innovative game per se, because it's almost voyeuristic and like watching like a fly on the wall, as you mentioned. Do you consider this to be kind of a future of gameplay, and how does that impact the scoring process all around?
Well, it doubles, quadruples the amount of music you may have to write. I mean, I think that Netflix are developing the concept of Bandersnatch, for example, and there are a couple of other companies I know of that have made interactive movies. I think the problem with gaming is wonderful because you are pushing for engagement, and there's a desperate need in passive linear forms of storytelling. How can you engage? How can you increase engagement with the audience? And so I think there is definitely experimentation going on, and FMV was popular at a certain point. It had its pockets of popularity, and I think it's coming back. There's the Sony PlayStation Erica game again. That was quite interesting. There are different schools of how to engage interactivity in linear storytelling. How people are doing that. So yeah, I'm all for it. I find it a very exciting space to be in, to see how things develop further.
There certainly are a lot of innovations, and from all of your experiences from all four composers, there's going to be a lot of really fascinating games and film and TV works to come. So I think we want to draw this panel to a close now. We've had a really exciting discussion. We apologize that we couldn't answer every question in time, but that's probably also a good sign that there's a lot of really engaged attendees out there. So thank you so much for that, for all the attendees. I want to personally thank everyone, Bobby, Joris, Nanita, and Patrik. It's been an absolute pleasure to moderate this panel. I'm inspired, and I look forward to seeing all of your amazing projects to come.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you once again to everyone, and thank you to Yati. Thank you to all our attendees for taking the time to follow our discussion today. And thank you for your very insightful questions. The recording of this webinar will be available on the EXA YouTube channel, so you will get the chance to watch it again. And then one final thank you to the Creative Europe program, the Commission Framework Program for Cultural and Audiovisual Sector, for supporting EXA and every event that we do. And good luck to all of you, and hope we will get to see you again soon in real life too.
Thanks a lot, Alessandra. So farewell, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Nice meeting you all.
Bye-bye.
Take care.